I will go ahead and get started, and then if we have other people join us, we can kind of catch up or clarify anything that I may have missed. So, but yeah, Alex, I'll leave it up to you, and then we'll go from there.
All right. So on behalf of Bakuho, thank you for attending this session. I just wanted to give thank you to John Michael Hakey. His pronouns are he, him, his, and he is here to present to us about Rho Alpha Sigma, the Resident Assistant Honorary Society. So take it away.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I'll echo that. I said thank you for your interest in kind of hearing kind of what we have to say here. And again, like I said, my position is an assistant director. I'm actually at Morehead State University, which is actually just over the West Virginia border in Kentucky. So we're thereabouts. I always joke with people. I mean, it's always nice to kind of get some of these morning presentation times, because normally when I get selected to present at a conference, I get that coveted right after lunch spot. So having something a little different, it's always good. And so, but yeah, again, like, thank you for kind of being willing to hear this. Like I said, I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully that translates into what I want it to be, and then we will go from there. All right, we'll hide that. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable if like people need to jump in, or if you like have any questions. I want to try and like flag me down on like your screen, or we'll kind of also keep track of the chat if there are any questions, to be able to kind of answer any clarifications or anything. So, but yeah, like I said, I mean, our goal, or like I said, especially my goal for kind of this session, is just to provide kind of a brief overview of kind of Rho Alpha Sigma, who we are, what we do, for anyone who may be interested, kind of how to charter a chapter on campus, kind of what some of those chapters do within that. And so, but yeah, like I said, as I go through this, like I said, kind of our general overview of everything. Again, any questions or anything, by all means, please ask. We'll clarify any of those details. And so, yeah. So yeah, right off the bat, a little bit about kind of our history. Anyone who's worked with me knows I love my history. I love my foundation on things. For my Clifton strengths, context is my number one. So having that context on things always helps me kind of relate to some things. So a little bit of kind of where we are, kind of how we've got to this point. The organization was founded 2002 at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. It was like a group of 5 students who were really invested as RAs, who wanted to kind of take their leadership to that next level, and really trying to figure a way to kind of honor themselves and provide that service, not only to students on campus, but that select group of students who kind of stepped into these leadership roles and kind of finding ways to do that. The Greek letters, as you kind of may see, they look very familiar in terms of kind of the abbreviations we use, but it was very much meant to reflect, like I said, that resident advisor, resident assistant, kind of whatever term is used, service, and kind of recognizing that service that these students are providing to their community, their universities. Again, kind of our colors, you'll see kind of that more closer to like that navy blue and kind of Vegas gold within that. And again, for me as someone, I love, like I said, my symbols and kind of the meaning that they hold. Our main symbols for kind of the society are kind of the circle, the candle, and the compass. A lot of that is kind of the unity of community, that candle of like guiding the way, and then that compass of kind of helping individuals kind of find that way and providing that direction for them as well. And so those become very integral to a lot of things within the organization, like induction ceremonies, and kind of the recognition that kind of comes with those kind of things. And so, again, talked a little bit about chapters. And so in the, almost 30 years at this point, with the organization had almost 20 years, sorry, rounded up a little bit too far, that the organization has kind of been existent. We've colonized 72 chapters. Our 72nd chapter was earlier this year at Bowie State. And so, one of the things, especially as I got involved and kind of learned more about kind of the history, it was always interesting to see the range of schools that we've had represented during that time, and whether that we were talking about like community colleges, small liberal arts schools, large resource institutions, HBCUs. I know we've got at least one, I think maybe 2 or 3 primarily Hispanic serving institutions as well, that we have on our chapter list. And so, it's really one of those things where, we've had a wide range of schools, and there's a lot of different ways these chapters can be utilized and colonized on different campuses. And we can talk a little bit about that in a little bit. currently, and kind of this is kind of I think where kind of our current situation in society and kind of the impact of kind of COVID on a lot of our campuses. Currently, I mean, we go through our affiliation period is about like a July to June, and so for our current affiliation year, we have 13 active chapters within that. You know, we've kind of reached out and kind of some of the other chapters and got kind of said talked a little bit about kind of the struggles and the priorities of kind of stuff that's going on their campuses. It's been a little bit of a struggle to kind of maintain some of that. And so right now we are at 13 active chapters across kind of our chapters. So, and as you can kind of see by that map there, very heavy influence in the Makuho region. So we've had a number of schools in our time kind of in that area within that. And so, yeah. So yeah, when we talk about kind of the values, and again, we talked a little bit kind of like what those symbols mean and kind of how those get echoed. Again, kind of the core values, and you'll see that across the bottom of all of our slides here. Kind of when we talk about that excellence, leadership, community, you know, in both service and services that our chapters provide. And like I said, you really see that when we talk about, like I said, what that excellence look like for these students who've not only chosen, you know, for most of these cases, to be kind of employees on our campuses, but really kind of stepped into this leadership position. And so that's what we talk about in terms of kind of what we do as a whole. And you'll see this kind of the terminology we use a lot. It's like, you know, we default to using that kind of RA kind of acronym just because that tends to be the more identifiable acronym for these live-in student staff positions. But like I said, a lot of the campuses can define them very differently, whether that's community advisor, community assistant, resident advisor, resident assistant, or again, titles can vary from campus to campus. We default to kind of using the RA term just because it tends to be a little more recognizable within that. But again, part of that is recognizing that not only are we gonna, and I'm sure we've seen these on our own campuses, do we have these students who step into these roles to kind of serve their communities, kind of serve their campus, but we're also gonna have those group of students who wanna also serve their peers and serve, you know, be leaders amongst those leaders as well. And so, you know, our goals very much come in kind of promoting kind of student affairs, you know, amongst this, and kind of recognizing that I'm sure I can speak for my own experiences, and I speak for a lot of people that when we come into colleges and universities or kind of start our path and start down that journey, most of us don't think, oh, student affairs or college and university is kind of where we're going to be, or kind of what that means a career past graduation. But it isn't usually until we get into these roles that we realize this is something I enjoy doing, and oh, this career path exists beyond graduation for me. So kind of promoting that, again, from we talk about like those most skilled, you know, live-in staff and promoting kind of what that service looks like. You know, we have all worked with those students who they enjoy what they do, but they also want to do more, want to find ways to do more within that. So how do we kind of take those student leaders who have stepped into these roles and kind of promote what does it mean to be a leader amongst leaders, and kind of being in those pieces as well. So that's really kind of what we do about some of those things. And so typically when we start to talk a lot about that, usually the next question we get is, a lot of that sounds very familiar. And so that's where usually we talk about, okay, well, what's the intersection with like this and like NRHH? Because again, you see a lot of those values and a lot of those things kind of overlap a lot of it. So, and obviously anyone who's kind of worked with the National Residence Hall Honorary chapter, you kind of know it's like, it's open to the larger on-campus population. I actually think very recently they've expanded that to create some exceptions where someone who has lived on campus but maybe has moved off, there's now a percentage of their chapters that, you know, they can have someone who currently lives off. I forget the exact percentage off the top of my head, but kind of they promote that leadership to kind of like the general student population. And while there tends to be a little bit of overlap, because obviously, especially with NRHH, if you're looking for that 1%, usually there's a lot of overlap with those student leaders who step into our positions within that. And so like I said, there are some of those shared values within that. But like I said, kind of where we differ a little bit is that we kind of have a little bit more of that focus on that those specific student leaders, and those students who kind of have shown that interest and that service in this specific area to work within that. And like I said, I mean, there may be some overlap within kind of some of those values, but again, and you know, I could say this is someone who's kind of advised both RHA and kind of NRHA taking students to conferences, specifically geared towards those conferences, and kind of where some of that focus on the leadership and the development. And like I said, the skills and a lot of the things that they do talk about are very transferable. But I've also been in that space where they've had like a keynote speaker, and the keynote speaker makes the mistake of assuming like everyone in the room is an RA or in those leadership positions. You can kind of feel that little bit of that tension in the room. It's like, yeah, that's not quite what we are. Some of them might be, but you can see kind of that little bit of a distinction of kind of what an NRHH serves and kind of where, like I said, our organization kind of comes into play, and being able to kind of recognize, these students who have kind of shown that willingness to step into these roles, and how do we provide support for those kind of things, that recognize, what levels that we can provide that additional level of development, that additional level of recognition for these chapters, for those individuals who are, like I say, kind of showing that little bit of an interest in being more involved on a different level within that. And so that's actually kind of where that little bit of that distinction comes in. And, we have a lot of our campuses that kind of have both an NRHH chapter and a Rho Alpha Sigma chapter as well. And, one of the things that we kind of advise and kind of work with the areas is kind of where the intersectionality can be for those kind of things, how they support one another, how they work together. I could speak to having conversations with kind of one campus and thinking about like, well, like an NRHH chapter or an RHA, a chapter of Rho Alpha Sigma, maybe kind of some of the other organizations, how do those kind of play together? How can we kind of work within that? And so, some of the things that I tend to talk about is like, well, maybe you have that student leadership council where, your presidents or your chairs of these organizations have a regular meeting so that they can have those conversations with each other, make sure they're on the same page, make sure they're not, contradicting one another, or where are those ways that they can work together on shared events, shared service, those kind of things. And so like I said, it's one of those things where while there may be a little different focus within that, there are ways that those different groups can kind of work together with some of those things and be able to kind of identify ways that they can work together. But I think, again, we talk a little bit kind of how those different organizations can work together. There are different opportunities to be involved. I actually think it was, I forget the specific year, but there was actually a year where Rho Alpha Sigma worked with actually NACUR to where our Rho Alpha Sigma chapters could register to attend the NACUR conference at the institutional affiliation rate. So we've kind of had that little bit of that relationship in the past and kind of be able to kind of work together to navigate through some of those things and kind of recognizing kind of the shared values of those different organizations as well. So when we talk about kind of the leadership and kind of who's kind of driving the bus for kind of the organization as a whole, it starts kind of at the top of kind of our board of directors, and these are typically professional staff, people who have either been affiliated with the organization before and or have a current affiliation or work in kind of student affairs and particularly housing within that. And so we've got kind of our national advisor, our director who kind of handles like new chapter and recruitment services, educational programming, myself who kind of works as our director of communications. Then we've got 3 positions that are currently vacant. Again, current circumstances kind of I put different people's priorities in kind of different places. And so, but like I say, our philanthropy service recognition director, our operations director, and then our director kind of work with our member and alumni relations as well. And so this is the group that kind of in the interim is kind of managing a lot of the day-to-day kind of aspects, because most of these positions actually under normal kind of operations would actually advise kind of our student leadership positions, kind of our national chairs, and kind of works with a lot of those different pieces to kind of support these students who would normally kind of run the day-to-day operations of the organization. Again, with kind of priorities being where they are, sometimes things. All of these positions are actually vacant right now. And so we're kind of working to kind of figure out how we can kind of recruit from our membership, or if we maybe need to potentially restructure kind of some of those things to kind of best meet the needs of kind of our operations and kind of how things are operating both on a national level, but also with our campuses as well. And so normally I said those board of directors, right now we're kind of managing the day-to-day things, but normally a lot of these things which kind of advise and support a lot of these positions as well. In addition to kind of those 6 national chair positions, we also kind of have regional chairs. The way kind of our governance is set up is that we kind of have 8 regions divided amongst the country. And then kind of within those regions, there's a national chair kind of representative that kind of represents the institutions within that region to kind of see kind of where their interests are, checking in, seeing how we can support those things, and then that representation kind of on the board and kind of in terms of what that student leadership is. Again, those are actually like currently vacant as we're kind of figuring out how to recruit that. We've got some regions that only have like one institution. So it becomes kind of that duplicate if they have like a regional chair for that, and kind of figuring out the best way to kind of serve those institutions and kind of what that looks like for different things. So that's kind of like I said, the bigger kind of national picture on things in terms of kind of what leadership looks like, the representation, the values of the organization. When we're talking about like the actual chapters themselves, membership in terms of kind of a chapter is it's determined by, again, what does that institution determine a live-in student staff member is. Again, recognizing that, again, we use the kind of the core term or the core acronym RA to describe these things. But again, we also recognize that can look a little different. For those who have been on multiple campuses, there's no real direct cut and paste RA position is the exact same thing on every single campus. There tends to be some nuances, there tend to be some unique distinctions that are very specific to the campus, the structure of the department, whether you work with like a community development model versus a curriculum model. Those things can look a little different. And so it's really kind of what the campus really defines, what those live-in student staff positions are, and kind of working within some of those ideas as well. In terms of kind of the size of a chapter, there's no maximum limit, which I know was historically, especially for like NRHH, there tended to be like that, was limited to kind of the equivalent of like that 1% of kind of your on-campus population, which I actually think they have, this past summer, actually, they may have relaxed that and removed that kind of upper limit in terms of kind of what that is. But in terms of kind of like annually, like in actually inducting individuals, and again, recognizing it being like an honorary society and kind of what that means. The limits that are kind of currently defined by the organization is being able to induct a minimum of 4 members. So recognize, like I said, every campus population is going to have a different number of staff, some smaller, some larger, but the minimum number that someone can do is 4. But then kind of the ceiling becomes, depending again the number of live-in student staff you have, is a maximum of 10%. And so like I said, if you're a campus that has 8 RAs in total, just because it's small, like I said, I worked at a small community college at one point in my career where, like I said, we had 10 RAs in total on that campus. Theoretically, we could induct 4 members every year into, if we had a chapter of Rho Alpha Sigma on there. And so within 3 years, assuming we had no turnover, all of our staff theoretically could have been inducted as part of the society or the chapter on that campus. Again, assuming no turnover within that. Whereas, like I said, now currently like Morehead State, where we recently closed a hall, so we're down to 66, members, 66 live-in student staff on our campus. And so, we can do, we can induct 4 members, or we can induct as many as, let's say we'll round up, we can induct as many as 7 annually into kind of our, if we had a chapter here on our campus. And so like I said, that's kind of where kind of, we kind of define in terms of what membership looks like. Like annually, there is kind of those guidelines in terms of how many you can induct on an annual basis. But in terms of the overall cap of what that looks like, there is no ceiling in terms of here's the maximum number of members you can have at any moment in time. It's just like I said, that cap is more the annual kind of piece within that. So, and so in terms of kind of like what do chapters do? What can they do on different campuses? And so again, this is an honorary society, and so we want to make sure there's kind of that appropriate experience of kind of being inducted into an honorary society and kind of what it means to be a part of, again, this organization that is going to recognize not only here are the student leaders on our campus, but here are those leaders and those people, those individuals that are committed to kind of doing kind of that next level service. And so we have kind of the induction ceremonies, and they're kind of both public and private induction ceremonies. We have kind of those scripts to be able to kind of guide students and kind of those ceremonies that really talk to, here's what it means to, take on, this level of service. Here are kind of the symbols that go involved as a part of that, and kind of the routine and ritual that kind of comes with through that induction and comes through those induction pieces and kind of that sense of you have now kind of part of this, you've taken on these responsibilities and kind of communicating the values and the responsibilities that come along within that. Again, we talk about kind of what recognition looks like, and again, being a member and kind of starting a chapter and being affiliated with a chapter, what that means in general in terms of kind of that level of service. We also kind of do recognition kind of as part of that, and so we have kind of annual awards that we do kind of use to recognize the individuals for their service, the chapters that kind of demonstrate that level of excellence as well, and kind of work within that. Similar to like an NRHH, we have pins that come with the organization and be able to kind of given out and awarded. We also provide our chapters with graduation cords, and it's kind of the blue and gold graduation cord that can be ordered from our store that's available to kind of our members. So again, recognizing we have these students and want to be able to kind of share and recognize the service they've given to our campus and the service that they're going to show towards their peers. When they walk across that stage at graduation, how can they be able to kind of show that off and kind of show off that pride for that service that they've kind of given, like I said, both to their campus and their peers as well. And then there's definitely ways that, kind of chapters themselves can kind of go and kind of provide that recognition as well. Like I said, some of that could be reflective, kind of like what is familiar to like an NRHH chapter and the services that they provide to a campus. Some of it could be the recognition of kind of how they work with individual staffs or individual live-in student staff members. Again, there is a lot of flexibility for our chapters to kind of work with and kind of recognize, okay, what does that mean on their campus? Because again, we don't necessarily want them to sit there and say, well, our NRHH does this and our department that we work for does this. And we do this, and then there can be kind of duplicating, like, okay, well, NRHH is recognizing an RA of the year, but we also recognize an RA of the year. And if you get that conflict of like, oh, well, those are two different, the organizations recognize two different things. While it's good to recognize multiple people, there's a little bit of the optics of, well, why is this person over here, this person over here, this and these things. So like I said, we talk about kind of really working with kind of the campus level, understanding kind of what that looks like, making sure there is kind of unique, valued, and meaningful recognition that kind of goes within that, but as really ways that ways for the individual chapters can serve their individual campuses and recognize how they can do that and how they can provide that recognition for, again, these individuals who are always recognizing the service that they give and the leadership that they provide. So, and then we talk about like service, and like I said, similar again to an NRHH chapter, what does it mean to provide service? We recognize that, again, most of the individuals that we are representing are stepping into those roles to provide that service. But then kind of how do we reinforce those values? How do we reinforce those opportunities for those individuals as well? And so, again, whether that's, how do they tie this service into kind of the larger role that they're looking to play, whether that's on their campus or kind of beyond graduation? How does that look? Providing service opportunities to kind of promote the values of service and kind of bring back maybe some of those service learning aspects within that. And so there's a lot of different ways that we kind of try and provide that support on both the national level, but kind of how our chapters can do that kind of on their campus and kind of within their department, within their constituency as well. And kind of really, again, what does that look like? Like I said, both the larger and smaller levels. And then the other option for some of our chapters is to kind of be that advocacy group, for, RAs, student leaders, live-in student staff, on that. And again, recognizing that, these are individuals who, say like, hey, I want to be in this higher role. I want to be, within these roles, again, to be a leader amongst student leaders, and being a part of kind of that honorary society. How that chapter, how that, this honorary society, how this organization can advocate for their peers and, be that voice for them. I know there are a lot of campuses that have just kind of a general like RA advisory council or that group that can be, that voice for the staff, towards the department, for the department, those kind of things. But this is a group that I kind of recognize again that, having individuals that are saying like, we want to make this higher level commitment, we want to do more. Well, here's a group that can kind of be that voice, and they can go back to that staff, and they can be that go between the department and kind of the other students, even those that aren't necessarily, members or are interested in even kind of being a part of kind of a Rho Alpha Sigma chapter. But now you've got these individuals who are part of that, who are willing to speak for their peers, who are willing to provide that service for those other areas. And so, again, it's one of those things where, a chapter can serve a lot of different roles. Again, very much dependent on kind of what the campus needs. It can be just a straight honorary. We're recognizing, here are the individuals who have excelled, who have, done great things, and be within that, to a very, hands-on, we're going to do recognition, we're going to provide service, we're going to be an advocacy group for these student leaders, for these RAs on our campus. And so, like I said, it's a lot of different ways, and it can be very much what that campus needs, what that chapter feels is going to be the best use of those individuals' time, what is going to be the best use of their abilities for their campus, and how they can provide that best service to their student leaders, to their department, to their campus community, to really feel, okay, what can we do? What are our options? What are the things that we can do to best do those things? And so, and so talked a little bit about kind of what chapters do, kind of what the organization is. So for people who may be interested in kind of starting that chapter, and kind of what that process is going to look like, or what that can look like. Fairly straightforward, but obviously, as with any kind of national organization with individual chapter affiliates, there's a little bit of a process that goes into it. And so the first thing is kind of identifying, a student chair, that student leader who's going to kind of be the primary person to kind of be the contact, but also that professional advisor. I mean, as with any student organization on any campus, having those professional advisors to be able to kind of provide that guidance, provide some of those links becomes crucial. That, and also kind of helps us provide an additional contact point. Like I said, those will be kind of those contact points as we kind of go through the process. Who are we communicating from the larger organization with the campus, but kind of knowing who's kind of manning that ship, or who's kind of taking the reins on those kind of things is important for us. On our website, there is kind of that link to fill out a form of kind of a new chapter membership application. Again, and really just kind of ask, like, hey, tell us a little bit about your campus. Who are our primary contacts, for if we have any questions or clarifications. What's the interest in kind of starting a chapter? How do you think it can best serve your campus community? And just kind of serving that application. And kind of once we receive that application, it usually starts with either our national advisor or our director of kind of new chapter services. Kind of reaches out to kind of, again, start some logistics if there's any clarifying questions or anything like that. But kind of really start to look at, okay, well, where are you with this, or kind of what can we do to best support any clarifying questions within some of those things. There is an initial affiliation due to be able to say that chapter fee currently is $30 within that. And again, kind of our board director, our kind of contact with kind of the new chapter, the individuals who submit the application kind of go through kind of what the logistics may look like with some of that as well. And so, but yeah. And then once we kind of figure that out, the next thing is kind of creating that institutional charter, that governing document that's going to guide, the operations of the chapter. We have a template that chapters can use that kind of outline, like, here are some things that, yes, as being an affiliate of Rho Alpha Sigma, that you'll want to include. So stuff like, again, membership requirements, connections with kind of the national organization, or kind of our board of directors and the national chairs, those kind of things. But there's also room to be able to kind of tweak and tailor that. Again, for us, like I said, the only thing that we really specify is kind of what we need from a national level is kind of that chair for the chapter. But if a chapter wants to create additional positions of like a vice chair to be able to kind of manage different functions, or like a secretary or a treasurer, or like a recognition coordinator, those are things that are open to them, and kind of really like I said, it's one of those things where you have the flexibility to be able to kind of navigate that. Like I said, really the only thing that we designate is, hey, just have a chair. So if we have questions or we need to send out notifications to a chapter, who is that person or who is that individual that we're sending those things to? But like I said, there's a lot of flexibility to kind of create maybe those additional leadership positions within that. And then again, that document also becomes important. And I'm sure for anyone who's kind of worked with student activities on a college campus, that if you're going to be looked at as a recognized student organization on your campus, they're going to look for these governing documents as well. And so that provides kind of that gateway to be able to do that. And like I said, we have that template, we have those resources available to be able to say like, hey, here's your starting point and kind of where you can kind of tweak some of those things. And then, yeah, so like I said, you got that. We've got the green light from the national organization. We've got the dues. You've got that governing document. Now you can start inducting your initial class. And again, we've got that script as well of kind of what that looks like. Usually for that initial induction class, recognizing that in addition to maybe selecting those initial students who are going to be a part of that, until you truly do kind of that induction, even that chair that's kind of serving as a primary contact hasn't technically been inducted yet. And so that's kind of where that initial induction ceremony is kind of guided by the advisor to do that, because then now you'll kind of induct kind of all that group, including that initial chair, to kind of make sure they get just as much of that experience as well within that. And so again, there's a private ceremony, but there's also kind of a public ceremony to be able to kind of celebrate being induction and being inducted and being kind of a part of within that. And then from there, like I said, the chapter, I said it's good to go with things. And so usually kind of what we look for, and kind of like I said, that we try and maintain regular communications with our chapters just to maintain up-to-date information kind of annually. So there are annual affiliation dues that kind of come with kind of reaffiliating every year, making sure our chapters are up and active within those. And so the annual affiliation dues, there's a range. It kind of depends on the number of beds that you have on campus. And so anywhere from a school that has less than 1,000 beds on campus, the annual affiliation is $30, up to schools that have like more than 5,000 beds on campus. It's $60 per year. And that goes into kind of supporting, recognizing that we're going to probably have different chapter sizes within that range. That's kind of where that range of kind of affiliation dues comes into play with things. But in addition to kind of affiliation dues, we'll just make sure like, hey, your institutional charter is up to date. If you've made any changes and kind of gone through that formal process of making those updates and changes, making sure we have an updated version of that. Again, part of that, making sure we understand kind of how our chapters are operating and kind of how we can support them. Also doing some of those checks to make sure if there are any changes, those changes are consistent with kind of the national organization's values and expectations as well. We try and maintain that list of kind of affiliated and inducted members through our chapters. And so it's basically just making sure we have an updated roster of like, here's our active members, here's our kind of our inactive members, here's our members who have been transitioned maybe to alumni status. One of our big initiatives kind of moving forward with the organization is trying to really build and maintain that alumni base. It's something I think that as I see in kind of the time that I've been in here, something we've kind of let our alumni kind of get away from us a little bit. And so finding ways to kind of re-engage with that, especially as we think about promoting student affairs, in that industry and kind of those opportunities that kind of come with things, especially, with October, Careers and Student Affairs Month. We talk about like the cool Hawaii internships and like Stars College and kind of how to build those bridges and those kind of things. That is going to be kind of one of our major initiatives kind of going forward, is how do we reconnect with kind of our alumni base and kind of build those bridges from being affiliated and kind of being involved on those chapter level, and what does it mean to kind of have those chapters, and knowing that our alumni go a lot of different directions, and kind of see how we can kind of build some of those resources for our members as well within that. And so like I said, that's something kind of we're looking at kind of moving as we move forward with some of the things. So but yeah, like I said, and that's kind of where a lot of that falls in, like kind of once things are up and running, and so how we can kind of support some different channels and some different areas within that. So yeah, again, any other like information or like I said, clarification initially, like I said, our website is there. Feel free to kind of check that out. It's been, like I said, since I've started slowly kind of building some things up, making sure we're trying to add some resources. Like I said, we've kind of really been focused on how do we build our kind of current chapter resources in recent times, kind of make sure, again, we're providing those support. So we built those up. And so again, kind of the next phase of kind of building up, especially that website, is how to reconnect with our alumni and those kind of things. But and the contact information for all of our board of directors is on there as well. That is my direct contact information. If any questions or anything come up, both my kind of organizational email, but also kind of my professional emails on there as well. Don't hesitate to ask any questions. Like I said, we'll go to that. Like I said, I mean, I know if anyone's like me, you'll walk away from a meeting or conference session, and that's when the 3-4 questions really pop up when you've had a time to kind of process through all the information. And so don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions, clarify any details, and yeah, go from there with any of that. So, but yeah, that's kind of details or information that I kind of have. I'll kind of quiet down and be able to open it up if any questions or clarifications about anything that anyone may have about starting a chapter, what our chapters do, the organization as a whole. Happy to answer any questions or provide any clarifying details for any of that anyone may have.
I just wanted to know if NRHH is kind of like the same concept as the Resident Hall Association.
Through an occur, like NRHH is more so kind of the recognition side of that house, whereas kind of your RHAs tend to be a little bit more towards kind of the representative kind of piece on a campus. And so like I said, through an occur, if you look at that kind of the way that they structure those kind of things, there's no real set standard or expectations for an RHA because that is very campus specific. That is very much like how do these students or what does this organization represent the general student population on their campus within that. Whereas like I said, NRHH is more focused on kind of that recognition and kind of there's more so those expectations of, what does membership requirements look like? What does the organization do? And so through an occur, they kind of provide those two things. Now the two tend to run hand in hand. They both fall under that occur umbrella within that and be able to do those things. But they kind of serve a little bit of those two different functions, one being kind of representing students on the campus, the other being kind of the recognition side. And so that's where, we talk about for like Rho Alpha Sigma, like I said, we can kind of serve a little bit both of those roles for live-in student staff, for RAs, and kind of being that it could be that representative body of kind of here's these individuals who are selected to do that. But we also kind of have that very strong recognition piece of kind of making sure that we're taking those moments to recognize those student leaders, those live-in staff who are committing to kind of that higher level of responsibility, that higher level of engagement with those positions as well.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you all give graduation cords out.
We have those available that chapters can purchase graduation cords.
Yeah, I need my cord.
Well, again, we talk about, and I preach to our staff here, that for all the awards and recognition we give out through our department, through other channels, nothing tops being able to walk across that stage and getting that diploma and graduating from college. That is the highest accomplishment our students on a college campus can do. And so being able to give our staff, and like I said, and for our member institutions and our student leaders who are members of these chapters, being able to show off that pride in that moment is a huge thing for us, and being able to kind of give them a way to do that. Like I said, those cords place a very high value on that.
Yeah, I had to look back at my graduation pictures from undergrad. I didn't have my Rho Alpha Sigma cord.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, we can definitely. So those are available through our store to members or even alumni. So.
The question I had, because we don't have anything like this on our campus, like any type of honor society for our residential students, so this is like completely new for me. The dues, is that what the institution pays? Is it per person, or is it just a one-time fee? And is there any cost to the RAs that are going to be admitted to the program?
The dues themselves are per chapter. So we don't designate any kind of individual, paying dues. Now, how the chapter chooses to kind of acquire those dues is kind of up to the individual chapter. Some are very good at fundraising, and so that can come from that. Some, the department itself is very invested and bought into what this service and what it provides to our staff, and so they're willing to allocate that money to whether it's just the dues or whether the operating functions for the chapter that can come from the department based on, again, kind of however the department is able to do those things. It's really up to the chapter in terms of kind of how they kind of sustain kind of their operations within that place. The dues themselves, both the initial and the annual, are per chapter is the only thing that our organization is focused on. And kind of that affiliates the chapter and then being able to kind of function as affiliated chapter of the organization.
Okay, thank you.
I know, at least for me, when I was an undergrad student in Rho Alpha Sigma, there was a conference that Rho Alpha Sigma hosted. I believe it was at Drew University. Is that something that Rho Alpha Sigma as an organization would want to continue doing, like hosting conferences and connecting chapters to each other?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was one of the things that I noticed when I started a couple of years ago, that there were those conferences. And again, I don't know if it was just that they couldn't find institutions or like people to sponsor as hosts, or within that. I think kind of our current circumstances in society may open the door to being able to kind of do some of these things virtually, given that pretty much every other conference in our profession has gone that. And so that's going to be one of the ways that we can probably be able to kind of open that door again. I know it's been something like for me trying to ask those questions and kind of figure out how we can do those things. And as we grow and figure out and truly get a sense of like where, or at least how active most of our affiliated chapters are, and kind of now having kind of that sense of kind of where they are at different places. The goal is to hopefully kind of build as many of those connections as we can within that. And so I know I said it's some of the recent conversations of how do we do that, and kind of what those options are going to look like going forward. But yeah, I mean, it was one of the things that, again, as me being the history person that I am, and going back and doing those things and seeing kind of where those conferences were, and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get back to that point, and really figure out where we can. So I think, like I said, especially as we kind of move forward with things and kind of get a sense of kind of where we are as that organization, those are the avenues and opportunities we're kind of exploring to be able to kind of say, how do we get back to doing this?
How many HBCUs are a part of RHA outside of Bowie State University and the University of Middle Eastern Shore?
I'd have to double check and kind of see,
Okay.
because I know off the top of my head, I'm thinking off the top of my head, I can think of 4 that have been affiliated in total, and I'd have to double check our list of the 13 active ones, to double check and see where they are in terms of affiliation in this moment in time. But off the top of my head, there's 4 that I can think of that have been affiliated at some point.
Okay, so they might not be currently active.
Yeah, and that's where that's the one I think. Like I said, I'd have to double check specifically where our 13 are right now. Like I said, Bowie State I know is the one off the top of my head, just being the most recent one that is active. I'd have to double check on the other 3 just to not wanting to speak out of turn within that, just making sure I've double checked my work.
Thank you.
Any other questions, clarifications, details I can provide?
Last question, I think.
Go for it.
The director of alumni, I think it's affiliations, associations, something like that. What exactly would you look for them, like that? What exactly does that position do?
I think the goal for that position would be really and truly identifying the ways that we can reconnect with those members. And so part of it is going to be probably looking for someone who's kind of committed to that outreach, because I think that's where a lot of it is going to be, to kind of serve that position, kind of serve where we would look to go forward. And so it's someone who's going to be looking like, how do we connect some of these things, and where are ways that we can identify some of those outreach. We've got kind of social media where we may have a lot of alumni still attached to those things. But I think it's going to be kind of, some of it is kind of that string of, okay, we go here, go here, go here, and kind of how we can identify ways we can reach those individuals. And then once we have those individuals, and kind of being able to kind of maintain those connections. And so, does that look like of just, hey, creating an alumni newsletter that we can kind of create and distribute to them? Is it creating one or more alumni chapters within the organization? Is there ways that we can kind of get them involved and engaged of like mentorship programs with individuals? And so that's not necessarily to say like, hey, this is all on this person, but I think it's kind of looking at kind of finding somebody who can kind of see where those opportunities are to engage with our alumni, finding those ways to build those reconnections, and then figuring out what those opportunities are going to be. And so somebody who kind of has that passion, that interest in doing those things, and kind of would look to open those doors and build those bridges.
I do have one other question.
Mhm.
When you mentioned the student chair and the professional advisor would be the ones kind of like leading this, is there anything that the student chair gets in addition to like what everybody else gets from the group? Like, do they get something special at graduation because they were the chair, or is it like a resume builder for them?
On the kind of the larger level, we don't have anything that specifically designates the chair. And so that is something that we would really leave up to the individual chapter on kind of how they want to recognize that person's service to their chapter and kind of what recognition they would feel. And part of that, again, we have kind of our core kind of symbols, and we talked about like the key, the candle, and the compass. But we also recognize, like I said, individual campuses are going to hold different symbols as well within that. And so that is something that we would really put on, like I said, our individual chapters and kind of think like, how would you recognize this person who not only had serving as that live-in student staff who has stepped into kind of this honorary role in the society to be that, again, the leader among student leaders, but has now taken kind of that third level of kind of leadership role of really kind of guiding the group as itself. And so I would encourage like any of our chapters to really think about what does that look like on your chapter? What does that look like on your campus to be able to truly recognize the service this person has provided to that chapter, that campus, and kind of really what that looks like for those individuals as well. Be able to kind of sit there and say, we recognize the service and we want to provide you with that thank you as well.
And if we did want to do something special, like this is really small, like a little pin for them because they, pins for service or whatever, would we have to submit that to your organization for approval to use this information, like your logo and everything, or is it completely up to us and we just go ahead and do what we want to do to recognize them?
Yeah, I would say if it's something that uses kind of an institutional logo or kind of a symbol, just letting us know, kind of making sure that we kind of know, just so as make sure we're kind of as consistent with kind of brand standards and those kind of things. But there's nothing that would specifically limit to you saying like, hey, you have to use a university or an organizational symbol to do that. If you use something that's kind of on your own chapter specific, that wouldn't necessarily require any kind of approval or authorization for that kind of use.
Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for presenting, John. We really appreciate it. Just to remind you all, just make sure you fill out the evaluation. There's a QR code there. Just be sure that you complete that as soon as you can. And John, I would just say, just make sure you upload your presentation materials to the, and you'll receive an email about that, just making sure you upload your materials about it.
Already in the folder, so they're available for anyone to see.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you.